Hey guys, tonight we step into a Europe you've never seen before. You're lying back, maybe in your bed, maybe on a couch, and you close your eyes. Suddenly you're walking down a misty cobblestone street where the church bells toll and banners flutter. Except, the faces on those banners aren't stern kings or armored dukes, but queens, everywhere. The world has tilted. The crowns sit on heads braided with ribbons, pearls, and veils, and you're in the middle of it. What? If women ruled medieval Europe? That's our ride tonight. You probably won't survive this scenario if you're a man with fragile pride, but as a traveler drifting through time and imagination, you'll be just fine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm genuinely curious. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun rises over Paris, but instead of a king striding out from the royal chambers, it is Queen Isabel the Iron-Hearted. She moves through stone corridors with the certainty of someone whose word carries the weight of law. You follow her through the throne hall, the echo of slippers replacing the heavy stomp of boots. Courtiers bow, not to a man in a crown, but to a woman who has learned that softness is a mask she rarely wears. Europe, as you see it, doesn't look completely different on the surface. The same Gothic spires point at heaven, the same muddy markets smell of onions, fish, and manure, and the same peasants complain about taxes. But the voice giving orders at dawn, the one directing armies and signing treaties, always belongs to a woman. Here, daughters inherit as naturally as sons once did. Dynasties unfold like braids instead of spears, and yet, history is messy. Historians still argue whether real medieval queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine wielded actual control or just navigated the politics of powerful men. In this world, there's no debate. Power sits squarely in female hands. Eleanor isn't the exception, she's the blueprint. Every court in Christendom has its version of her. You wander past the gates of London, and the gossip is alive. Hey, peddler shouts about Queen Matilda's newest edict on land reform, and a fishwife grumbles that her husband now has to prove he can manage property before he's granted ownership. You smile, because in our timeline it took centuries before women gained those rights. Here, it's inverted. Men shuffle nervously at property hearings, tugging at their caps, while women stride into chambers already fluent in inheritance law. And while the idea of queens on every throne feels glamorous, it's not all perfume and velvet. We're still hangs heavy. Even in this upside-down Europe, rivals plot, borders shift, and soldiers bleed. You stand in a dawn-lit field near the Rhine, where banners ripple in the mist. Two queens meet in a tent, their voices hushed but sharp. One wants to annex a city, the other insists on a marriage pact. Neither raises her voice. Yet both radiate the kind of power that makes armored knights outside shuffle nervously at a fact to ground you. The medieval crown jewels weren't just crowns. They included relics, swords, and ceremonial robes, each piece dripping with symbolism. In this world, queens wield those same regalia, though perhaps with a sly twist. Instead of a scepter shaped like a cross alone, you picture one carved into the form of a lily, delicate yet sharp-edged, reminding everyone that femininity here is not weakness but weapon. Walking further, you stumble into a marketplace where embroidered cloth hangs in dazzling rows. A quirky tidbit slips into your ear from a gossiping merchant. Crocodile dung is the hottest new beauty product, said to keep skin radiant under candlelight. And you shake your head because, actually, ancient Egyptians did experiment with that. Very odd cosmetic. Somehow, it floated across centuries into this medieval bazaar. A noble woman scoops a jar while muttering that her husband better not touch it. The church bells ring, summoning townsfolk. In our real history, popes crowned kings, but in this alternate dawn, abbesses crown queens. Imagine the spectacle: an abbess in flowing robes placing a crown on another woman, chanting Latin while the crowd roars. The whispers of resistance are still there, though. A few monks stand in corners, muttering prayers that the order of the world has gone too far. Yet the crowd cheers louder, drowning them out. Everywhere you look, gender feels like the axis of a spinning wheel. Men still fight in tournaments, still sing songs of courtly love, still try to write poems to impress queens. But it's the queens who decide whether those knights get land, titles, or nothing at all. A troubadour strums his lute, crafting verses about lady sovereigns' daring ride into battle. You catch yourself humming along, because the melody is sweet, even if the history is bent into fantasy. And here's your first reality check. This world, while dreamlike, would have been brutally hard. Women didn't escape mortality rates, famine, or childbirth dangers just because they had crowns. The queens you see have the same mortal frames, the same frailty in winter plagues. And power. Oh, power still corrupts. A queen's smile can promise peace in the morning and send spies to poison rivals at night. As the day stretches on, you follow the flow of power across Europe, from Lisbon's coastal castles, where queens whisper with sailors, to Krakow's cold halls where a young ruler studies maps by candlelight. Each moment feels like the start of something unstable, something magnificent, something frightening. So you keep walking, shoes muddy, cloak pulled tight, as the question lingers. If queens ruled Europe, what would survive? And more haunting still, what would fall? Asterisk, you leave the gleaming courts behind and step into the heart of daily life. Not the polished marbled halls where queens sweep their gowns, but the muddy lanes, the noisy markets, the smoky hearths where real survival happens. This is where the inversion of roles feels most immediate. You trudge past a row of thatched cottages, and outside one of them, you see a man stirring a pot of porridge while a woman adjusts the yoke on two oxen. In our history, those tasks were often reversed. But here, men shoulder much of the child-minding, cooking, and weaving, while women stride out to till fields, negotiate prices, and argue with tax collectors. And you, wandering ghost-like through this reimagined medieval town, can't help but smile at the sight of a burly fellow carefully braiding his daughter's hair before school, his big hands fumbling over ribbons. The marketplace hums with this new rhythm. Women haggle over barrels of fish and bolts of cloth, voices sharp as steel. Men gather in clusters to discuss domestic remedies, swapping recipes for onion poultices and debating whether rosemary or thyme makes the stew taste less like mud. You catch a snippet about how garlic drives away evil spirits, or, as one fellow insists, keeps away his mother-in-law. You snort softly, and a nearby baker glances up as though he heard you, then goes back to kneading dough. The church still sits at the town's center, towering and unavoidable. But inside, pews are filled with men cradling infants while women step forward to confess, advise, and lead. It doesn't erase hardship. Disease still sweeps through with cruel regularity. Historians still argue whether midwives or monks carried more knowledge of medicine. But in this Europe, the midwives run guilds, train apprentices, and issue pamphlets copied by scribes. Picture it, a parchment flyer that reads, "Avoid drinking stagnant water unless you enjoy the company of worms." Not quite the miracle cure you hoped for, but practical enough. You duck under a wooden arch into a monastery-turned-nunnery, where silence supposedly reigns. Except, you hear lively chatter. Rows of nuns, quills scratching furiously, are copying texts by candlelight. The head sister pauses to give orders to a nervous young man tasked with sweeping. He bows and mutters that the ink stains will never come out. She replies sweetly, "Then scrub harder." You grin, realizing the inversion carries equal measures of humor and frustration. A historical fact slips into your ear. In the real Middle Ages, literacy among women was limited, though noble women sometimes learned to read scripture or poetry. Here, however, literacy spreads wider, because queens fund schools for girls as eagerly as kings once did for boys. This means your imagined Europe brims with young women quoting Virgil, debating Aristotle, and correcting the Latin of bashful priests. Walking further, you find yourself at a wedding feast. But the spectacle runs differently than you expect. A bride sits solemnly while the groom's family pledges dowries of sheep and honey. The bride leans forward and announces, "I accept him, but only if he proves he can embroider a passable altar cloth." Gasps ripple through the hall, and the groom, sweating, begins to stitch. The guests clap, half mocking, half genuine. You sip imaginary mead and chuckle, wondering if his stitches will ever hold. Quirky customs flourish here. Did you know that in parts of Europe, People once believed bread baked with fennel could protect a household from evil. In this inverted world, women enforce such superstitions with gusto, demanding husbands carry fennel loaves when traveling. One poor man sighs as he stuffs his satchel with bread, muttering that if bandits don't kill him, indigestion will. Not everything is whimsical, though. Taxes bite just as hard. You overhear a farmer's complaint. The Queen's reeves came today, and they measured our land down to the last furrow. In our real history, the Doomsday Book under William the Conqueror recorded who owned what. In this matriarchal Europe, imagine a Dominus book, compiled by tireless female scribes, each entry neat and exact, leaving no loophole for crafty peasants. As twilight falls, music drifts from a tavern. Inside, women slam mugs on tables, boasting of trade routes and grain harvests, while men perform juggling tricks to earn a few coins. One fellow balances on a stool, tossing knives in the air. You clap instinctively, then flinch when a blade nearly takes off his ear. He bows dramatically, blood trickling, and someone shouts, "Another round." You realize some gender roles don't so much vanish as swap costumes. The humor aside, there's tension underneath. You hear whispers of resistance. A few men grumble that the world has tilted too far, that they are denied inheritance, that their voices are ignored. A rumor spreads of a secret brotherhood forming in the forest, plotting a return to proper order. You lean closer, curiosity piqued. Historians still argue whether real medieval uprisings were about taxes or hunger, but here the spark is dignity, or at least bruised egos. The night air cools. Smoke rises from chimneys, carrying the smell of cabbage stew and wood ash. You picture yourself bedding down in a straw-stuffed mattress in one of these cottages, the sounds of children, livestock, and distant laughter drifting through the thin walls. The rhythm of life beats steady. It is strange, inverted, and yet oddly familiar. And as you drift further into the village, a thought lingers like candle smoke. When daily life changes hands, does it change hearts as well, or only who holds the broom? The sound of horns jolts you awake, and suddenly you are swept from village lanes into the charged heart of politics, where councils, smoke-filled halls, and the clash of ambitions. In this world, queens rule the battlefield, though not always, by riding out with lances lowered. Some do. Of course, there is always that one queen who insists on gleaming armor and a white charger. But most orchestrate war from long wooden tables strewn with maps, goblets of wine, and nervous advisors. You push open the heavy oak door of a castle's great chamber. Candles gutter in iron sconces, and the scent of beeswax and burnt meat clings to the air. Around the table sit queens wrapped in velvet cloaks. Their crowns rest nearby, not on their heads, because strategy requires freedom, not ceremony. Their voices overlap, quick, sharp, decisive. You watch as one queen, her fingers tapping the edge of a map, declares that the time has come to besiege a rival's fortress. Another interrupts with a smirk. Or perhaps you'd rather solve it with a marriage pact, as always. Laughter ripples, then silence falls like a blade that a mainstream historical fact drifts in. In 1139, Eleanor of Aquitaine rode on the Second Crusade with her husband, leading troops across harsh terrain. In our reality, chroniclers debated whether she was a distraction or an inspiration. Here, there is no debate. Every Eleanor-like figure commands respect. Her presence at war councils as ordinary as a bishop holding mass. The knights stand aside, waiting like pawns until summoned. They shuffle in their armor, eyes down, listening to women who argue over supplies, terrain, and alliances. One queen gestures toward a map and says, "If we move the cavalry here, the men can handle it." There's that quiet inversion again. You grin at the sarcasm in her tone. The knights flush, and one clears his throat, whispering, "Yes, Your Majesty." You notice the hall is more than war, it is performance. Courtiers lean close, scribes furiously record, and servants rush with jugs of watered wine. The queens know they're being watched, every gesture echoing across the realm. You think about how, in our history, kings used public war councils to project strength. In this Europe, queens wield the same stagecraft, but lace it with wit. One pauses mid-debate to quip. Historians will still argue whether this is wisdom or vanity. You nearly laugh aloud at her awareness of you, the unseen listener. Step outside the council chamber, and the air crackles with preparation. Soldiers polish armor, fletch arrows, and load carts. Yet something subtle has shifted. Women direct, men follow. You see a lady marshal counting supplies with stern precision, barking orders at squires. A man trips over a barrel of arrows, and she glares until he stammers an apology. You shake your head. Some things never change, no matter the gender. The clumsy squire is eternal. You move toward the tilt yard where knights usually joust, but the atmosphere has altered. Queens still sponsor tournaments, but the spectacle serves a different purpose. Rather than knights competing for ladies' favors, here men joust to prove themselves worthy of political appointments, even domestic honors. Picture a joust where the prize is not a kiss but the post of royal steward. You smirk at the thought of armored men shattering lances for the right to manage kitchens and cellars. And yet, war is not just tournaments. You trudge along a muddy road where troops march under banners embroidered with lilies, ravens, and suns, symbols chosen by queens. Drums thud. Somewhere in the ranks, a soldier mutters a complaint about fighting for land he will never own. Another replies, "At least our queen feeds us." You realize morale here rises and falls just like in our real wars. Power shifts. But hunger never cares that a quirky tidbit surfaces from history. In medieval battles, soldiers sometimes used pigs as living firebombs, coating them in pitch and setting them loose to panic enemy war elephants. Imagine a queen calmly ordering, "Release the pigs." You shudder at the image, but also laugh at the absurdity. War, even under queens, invents its own nightmares. As twilight deepens, you follow the queen's army into camp. Fires glow, men cook gruel, and women officers circulate to ensure discipline. In one tent, a queen leans over a chessboard, moving pieces as she discusses strategy with her advisors. The metaphor is deliberate. Bishops slide, pawns fall, queens dominate. You stand in the shadows, watching as she tips her piece forward, whispering, "Sacrifice him here, and the city is ours." But peace always has its shadow. In the distance, you hear horns from the enemy camp. Rival queens sharpen their plans, their letters dripping with diplomacy and threat. One missive arrives on parchment scented with rose oil, the words flowing in elegant script. "We can either share a border or a graveyard. Choose." You can almost hear the smirk in the handwriting. The fire pops. You sit near the soldiers, their chatter weaving between fear and jest. One jokes about the crocodile dung face cream being rationed to nobles only. Another mutters he'd rather smear dung than march tomorrow. Laughter bursts, brief and nervous. You think about how humor always pierces the tension, whether in a king's or queen's camp. When the night deepens, you glance back at the war council tent. Candlelight flickers against the canvas. Inside, queens still argue, marriage, siege, or treaty. The debate loops endlessly, because war is less about swords than patience. And you, drifting between fire and shadow, wonder whether these councils truly change history, or if, no matter who rules, Europe always circles back to the clash of ambition and the cry of trumpets. Asterisk. You leave the flickering campfires of war behind and step into the hush of sanctuaries, cloisters, and candlelit chapels. The air is heavy with incense and the low drone of chants, yet something about it feels unfamiliar. That's because, in this world, women guide the church with steady hands and sharp eyes. You walk slowly down the nave of a cathedral, your footsteps echoing on stone worn smooth by centuries of prayer. At the altar, not a tonsured monk or towering bishop, but an abbess presides. Her voice carries with authority, calm and commanding, as she blesses pilgrims kneeling in rows. The stained glass windows glow with images of holy women, saints, martyrs, even prophets once overshadowed by their male counterparts. You pause, realizing how strange it feels to see Mary Magdalene larger than Peter, her story told not as footnote, but as pillar in our history. Abbesses like Hildegard of Bingen wielded influence through visions, letters, and music, but they were exceptions, remarkable voices in a male-dominated hierarchy. Here, however, Hildegard is no outlier. She is the model, the voice every young nun aspires to match. Her chants are sung across Europe, not as curiosities, but as canon. You lean against a column and listen to voices rise, notes trembling like candle flames, washing over you until you almost forget time. Of course, the clergy does not surrender easily. Monks grumble in corners, whispering that the natural order has been toppled. You overhear one mutter that women should not instruct men in scripture. His companion shrugs and replies, "Tell that to the abbess. She'll have you scrubbing floors." You chuckle softly, though you know the tension runs deeper. Historians still argue whether medieval faith ever allowed room for true female leadership, but here that argument is already lost. The abbess's ring gleams, and her word binds kingdoms beyond. The cathedral, you wander into a monastery repurposed. Instead of monks debating theology, rows of women debate doctrine, law, and even science. A novice raises her hand timidly, asking whether the earth truly stands still. The abbess frowns, then allows, "Perhaps not." But faith remains steady, even if the stars move. You grin. Controversial ideas sprout here as freely as herbs in a cloister garden. Speaking of gardens, you step into one. The air smells of rosemary, sage, and thyme. Women in habits bend over the plants, cutting stems and murmuring prayers. One whispers to another that thyme under the pillow brings good dreams. Another insists garlic strung above the door wards off demons. You remember that garlic superstition from the village and laugh quietly. Apparently, no one escapes garlic's reputation. But faith in this world isn't only gentler, it has teeth. You hear the tolling of a bell summoning townsfolk to a trial. Inside the chapter house, a woman bishop presides over accusations of heresy. A trembling man protests his innocence, but the bishop's gaze is cold. She leans forward, intoning scripture, then sentences him to fasting and exile. Power, you realize, corrupts no matter who holds the gavel. And yet, alongside severity, you notice unexpected flourishes. Choirs led by girls, libraries curated by women scholars, sermons filled with imagery of birth, harvest, and weaving. Instead of only martial metaphors, faith here embraces domestic rhythms elevated to divine symbols. You sit, lulled by the cadence of prayers that compare God's grace to milk warming over a fire. It's oddly comforting, even if your stomach rumbles that a quirky tidbit slips in. Medieval folk sometimes used powdered toad bones as protection against evil. In this world, nuns distribute such charms with solemn ceremony. One slips a talisman into your hand, whispering, "For safe travels." You stare at the odd little object and murmur thanks, wondering whether faith or frog is supposed to keep you safe tonight. As night deepens, you sense the undercurrent of resistance. Secret fraternities of men whisper in taverns that the church should return to male control. Their pamphlets circulate, scribbled manifestos questioning abbess authority. You picture them huddled over ale, planning reforms that will never come, and you smile sadly. Every age has its rebels. The bells toll. Again, softer this time, calling to evening prayer. You settle into a pew, watching candle flames flicker against painted saints. The abbess raises her arms, and voices swell around you. In this matriarchal faith, women guide the soul's path just as queens guide the realm. Whether gentler or harsher, wiser or flawed, the church under their rule reshapes not only heaven's story but earth's. And as you close your eyes, the chants blur into lullabies. You breathe incense and candle smoke, and you wonder, when the sacred wears a different face, does holiness itself change, or only the mirror we hold it in? The smell of spice greets you before the sight does. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and saffron, carried on caravans that crawl across dusty roads. In this Europe ruled by queens, trade pulses like lifeblood, and women direct the flow with the precision of weavers at a loom. You find yourself on the docks of Venice, where sails billow in the salty wind. Normally, merchants would be loud, bargaining and bellowing. Here, they still are, but it's merchant queens who dominate the noise. Cloaked in embroidered silks, they stride between crates and sailors, inspecting cargo with sharp eyes. One leans down to taste a grain of sugar before nodding approval. Another frowns at a bolt of cloth and mutters, "Too coarse for Florence, send it north to Flanders." You realize the economy here doesn't trickle down from kings' treasuries. It flows outward from queens' ledgers that a mainstream fact slides in. In real history, The Hanseatic League dominated northern trade, linking towns from Lubeck to London. Male merchants formed guilds that controlled routes and prices. But in this world, picture guild mistresses, powerful women in fur-trimmed cloaks, holding hammers as symbols of authority, dictating which ports flourish and which wither. They stamp charters with seals shaped like roses or suns, signatures that ripple across seas. The quirky edges of trade show themselves too. You overhear sailors grumbling that one queen insisted on importing peacocks, their screeches now tormenting the harbor. Another caravan carries nutmeg, which locals believe cures everything from toothache to heartbreak. You chuckle when a young man begs his mistress for a pinch, only to sneeze uncontrollably. The woman shakes her head, muttering. Historians will still argue whether nutmeg heals or humiliates. Markets sprawl in every city. In Bruges, women auction off tapestries so detailed you feel you could walk into them. In Toledo, female blacksmiths hammer coins into fine edges while debating theology with customers. Even in muddy village fairs, you hear women boasting of exotic wares, dried figs, salt from far coasts, dyes that turn cloth crimson. The men stand behind, balancing scales, nervous to miscount. You grin, sensing how different life feels when ledgers, not swords, define greatness. But trade isn't only wealth, it's danger. Pirates lurk on the Mediterranean, and you catch sight of a queen's warship bristling with archers. Instead of a male admiral, a woman in chainmail directs the crew, barking orders with crisp authority. Sailors scramble, their faces pale as they spot a pirate galley. The Queen Admiral raises her hand and calmly declares, "Loose." Arrows rain, and the pirate sails falter. You sigh with relief. Even though you weren't the one steering in the east, caravans snake along the Silk Road. Queens send emissaries to bargain with Mongol Khatans, women of power themselves. Imagine the scene. Two rulers seated on cushions, sipping fermented mare's milk, discussing tariffs with sly smiles. No swords drawn, but every word sharp as steel. You can almost taste the dust in your mouth, hear camels groaning under loads of jade, porcelain, and silk. Closer to home, money shifts society. In our history, dowries chained women into marriages. Here, men arrive with dowry chests, offering wool, goats, or gold to prove themselves worthy. A merchant queen leans back in her chair, inspecting the gifts with theatrical disinterest, while her advisors whisper, "He'll never manage a warehouse." You bite back a laugh at the awkward groom clutching his goat as if it were treasure. A quirky tidbit from the docks. Some sailors believe onions ward off seasickness. You see one clutching a whole bulb, gnawing on it like an apple while his ship sways. The stench nearly knocks you over, but he insists, better stink than sink. You nod politely, gagging a little, and beneath the humor, there is unease. Wealth concentrates in the hands of ruling queens, but resentment grows. Men complain in taverns that opportunities slip away, that guilds reject them, that inheritance favors daughters. You hear murmurs of black markets where desperate men sell contraband spices and smuggled cloth. Their whispers rise like smoke. Dangerous. Inevitable. Night deepens. You stand on a pier, watching lanterns bob on the waves. Ships creak, sails ripple, and the scent of spice clings to the air. The queen's treasurer, a stern woman with ink-stained fingers, tallies the day's profits in a great leather book. Her voice is soft but absolute. We prosper, and tomorrow we prosper more. You lean against a barrel, lulled by the sound of waves. This Europe is not built only on crowns and castles, but on caravans and contracts, coins and courage. And as you close your eyes, you wonder, when queens control the purse strings, does gold shine brighter, or simply cast longer shadows? The clang of a hammer echoes across the courtyard as you drift toward a stone hall where justice itself is being reshaped. The smell of wax and parchment greets you before the sight does. Rows of scribes hunched over desks, scratching notes. As a queen's court prepares for the day. Here, law is no longer the blunt tool of kings. It is the fine embroidery of queens. You slip into the chamber where judgment unfolds. Instead of a bearded magistrate pounding his staff, a woman sits on a high seat, robes sweeping around her like storm clouds. Her crown is absent. She wears spectacles instead, peering down at the accused. The crowd hushes. A farmer bows low, trembling as he explains his neighbor stole a cow. The queen judge listens, tapping her quill on the armrest, then gestures for the neighbor to speak. The man stammers, caught in lies. She raises an eyebrow, and the hall erupts in murmurs. Everyone knows she sees through him. In our real history, legal systems like English common law emerged under men such as Henry II. Here, imagine Henrietta II, a queen codifying laws, with her council of ladies, laying out precedent with as much precision as a weaver laying threads. You hear her decree: land inheritance shall follow the eldest daughter unless she is proven unfit. The scribes write furiously, knowing the words will ripple across generations. Justice is not just inheritance, though, it's punishment. You watch as a thief is brought forward. He shakes, expecting the gallows. Instead, the queen orders him to labor repairing bridges for a year. Better to mend what was broken than break another man, she says. You smile faintly. Mercy has teeth, but they bite differently here. Quirky tidbits pepper the day. A clerk tells you that in some towns, hens are considered legal witnesses. Their clucking can confirm whether grain theft occurred. You blink, wondering if this is satire. The clerk swears it's true, though he admits hens can be bribed with corn. You shake your head, suppressing a laugh. Inheritance laws twist society in peculiar ways. Men grumble that their sons are left with nothing, while daughters inherit farms, titles, and shops. You overhear a bitter father muttering that he raised his son to plow fields, not embroider dowry cloths. His wife snaps back, then teach him both. Around you, the air buzzes with tension. Laws create winners and losers, and resentment simmers like stew over low fire. A mainstream historical fact roots itself here. Trial by ordeal, plunging hands into boiling water or carrying hot iron, was once common in medieval Europe. In this alternate world, queens abolish such cruelties earlier, replacing them with sworn testimony, written contracts, and community arbitration. Yet superstition lingers. A village woman insists that only by walking 3 times backward around a church can innocence be proven. You watch a poor man stumble through the ritual, nearly tripping over his own feet, while onlookers shake their heads. Justice, it seems, never fully escapes ritual. Courtrooms are also theaters of power. A wealthy, noble woman enters, her gown glittering with jewels. She demands her brother's estate, claiming he wasted it on gambling. The queen judge leans forward, eyes narrowing. After a tense silence, she rules in the sister's favor, citing a new statute against reckless squandering. The brother shouts. Historians will still argue whether this is justice or tyranny. Guards drag him out, and the hall buzzes. Not every case ends with dignity. You hear laughter spill from an annex chamber where petty disputes are tried. 2 men bicker over who owns a goose. The judge sighs, orders the goose placed in the middle, and waits. The bird waddles to one man. Case closed. You chuckle, realizing justice often flaps its wings in ridiculous directions. At night, the hall empties, but the scribes remain. Their candles burn low as they copy statutes into great codices. Heavy books bound in leather, lined with meticulous script. You trail your hand over one and feel the indentations. The law here is alive, breathing through ink. Step outside, and the city itself feels reshaped. Men step carefully, aware that missteps in markets or marriages may bring them before a female judge. Women stride with confidence, quoting statutes, citing rights. Yet not all accept this world. In taverns, you hear whispered jokes. If hens are witnesses, then roosters will be judges next. Laughter follows, brittle and nervous. Rebellion always begins with humor. The moon rises above the courthouse. You linger, watching the last scribe close a book and blow out her candle. Justice in this Europe is not softer, not harsher. It is different. A thread woven by hands that once mended cloth now mends kingdoms. You breathe in the night air and wonder, does law change who rules us, or only who writes it down? Asterisk your path. Winds uphill toward the looming silhouettes of castles. Not the cold, square fortresses you might expect from history books, but structures infused with a distinct blend of grace and menace. Castles envisioned by queens. The stone is the same, gray and immovable, yet the design whispers a different sensibility. Towers rise with slimmer lines, courtyards bloom with herb gardens, and windows arch wider, letting in more light. Power here is still fortified, but it breathes. You cross a drawbridge into one such keep. The portcullis rattles above, chains, groaning, but instead of soldiers barking, women at the gatehouse command the routine checks. A queen stewardess waves you through, her quill tucked behind her ear as she scribbles inventory. Barrels of mead, bolts of cloth, a cage of squawking geese. You grin at the geese. Apparently, they double as guard animals and menu items. Inside, the great hall bustles. Women in armor polish weapons by the hearth. Men bustle in kitchens, stirring pots the size of bathtubs, sweat gleaming on their brows. A minstrel sings verses about Queen Marguerite's victory at sea, strumming a lute slightly out of tune. The air smells of roasted boar, rosemary, and the faint tang of ink from scribes hunched at a long table. That a mainstream fact anchors the scene. In our timeline, castles often featured chapels, kitchens, and great halls built for both defense and ceremony. Here, too, function remains, but queens add layers of intent. Chapel murals depict women, saints leading armies. Kitchens produce elaborate spiced dishes, rumored aphrodisiacs, destined for visiting diplomats. Even the architecture carries meaning. Staircases twist clockwise, favoring left-handed defenders. Because one queen happened to be left-handed and declared it wise. You wander into a private chamber, walls hung with tapestries of battle and harvest. The queen's chamberlain walks beside you, explaining the layout. Our Lady insisted on windows facing east to greet dawn before her council meets. She also ordered a secret passage to the nursery, so she may reach her children even during siege. The detail strikes you. It isn't softness, but strategy shaped by care. Quirky tidbit time. One tapestry depicts a unicorn drinking from a fountain, symbol of purity. You recall that in our world, nobles believed powdered unicorn horn, actually, narwhal tusk, could cure poison. Here, queens keep such horns locked in vaults, sprinkling dust into goblets during banquets. A servant whispers that it tastes like chalk. You chuckle at the image of queens pretending it's divine elixir while secretly gagging. You make your way to the ramparts. The view stretches across farmland and river, lit by torches and a sliver of moon. Female captains patrol the walls. Voices low but sharp. They check the ballistae, test ropes, and peer into the dark. You overhear one grumbling that men fall asleep too easily on watch. Another replies, then kick them awake. You smile, recognizing that discipline doesn't soften simply because women command it. Below, peasants carry supplies into storage vaults. Grain, salted fish, barrels of ale. Castles under queens stockpile differently. Alongside weapons, they hoard medicinal herbs, linens, and soap. You laugh softly at the idea of hygiene as warfare, but it makes sense. Disease has claimed more armies than arrows ever did. Perhaps, this time, fewer soldiers will die of lice and dysentery. Inside again, the castle reveals its contradictions. Lavish feasts alternate with stern councils. One moment, the queen listens to minstrels sing of her glory. The next, she slams a goblet down, declaring war. Power here is both velvet and iron, embroidery and execution. Historians still argue whether castles were symbols of oppression or community hubs. In this world, they are both, but with a matriarchal twist. You see noble women settling disputes. In the courtyard, peasants lining up for bread, men gossiping in the kitchens about who the queen favors this week. Gossip, you notice, flows just as easily through stone corridors as water in moats. Night deepens. Torches flicker along the walls, casting shadows across battlements. In the queen's solar, she leans over maps by candlelight, her advisors murmuring. Outside, men hush babies in cradles, pacing floors while their wives argue politics in the great hall. The castle breathes with rhythms both ancient and inverted. You step back into the courtyard. The moon hovers above, and the air carries both smoke and lavender. Fortresses under queens still defend, still intimidate, but they also nurture. You wonder if a castle shaped by matriarchy becomes less a cage of stone and more a living heart, still dangerous, still unyielding, but pulsing with something new. The castle fades behind you as music, laughter, and whispers pull you toward a different theater of power, the chamber of love and scandal. In this Europe ruled by queens, marriage is not merely alliance, but weapon, and affection often plays second fiddle to strategy. Still, where hearts beat, rules bend, and gossip spreads like wildfire through corridors and taverns, you find yourself in a candlelit ballroom. Silk gowns sweep across polished floors, jewels glimmer in torchlight, and the air smells faintly of rosewater and wine gone slightly sour. At the center, a queen surveys the crowd, her crown exchanged for a circlet of pearls. Suitors gather, men vying for her hand. But here, the roles twist. It is the queen who chooses, her gaze lingering just long enough to make men blush. A smirk plays across her lips as she murmurs, "Not that one. His shoes are scuffed." You grin, realizing reputations fall faster. Here than swords on a battlefield, marriage remains a tool of empire. In our real history, queens like Isabella of Castile united kingdoms through wedlock. Here, every queen practices that art with cold calculation. You watch as treaties are sealed not with ink, but with veils and vows. A nervous groom from Burgundy fumbles as he pledges loyalty, while his new wife, the queen, tightens her grip on his hand like a vice. The message is clear. He may wear the ring, but she holds the realm. Historians still argue whether medieval queens wielded private or public influence more effectively. In this inverted Europe, there's no distinction. The private bedroom is the public battlefield. Behind the scenes, alliances rise and crumble based on whether a queen finds her husband charming, dull, or simply expendable. And scandal, oh scandal, thrives. You overhear whispers about a queen who keeps a stable boy as her confidant, perhaps more than that. Another rumor swirls that a royal widow refuses to remarry at all, insisting she prefers solitude. Courtiers gasp, scribes sharpen quills, and bards compose sly verses thinly veiled as songs. You chuckle. Gossip, after all, has always been Europe's most reliable currency. A quirky tidbit floats up. In our history, people believed certain foods, like almonds, ginger, or oysters, sparked passion. Here, entire kitchens revolve around such beliefs. You watch a cook proudly carry a tray of almond tarts, declaring them arrows of Cupid. A skeptical man bites one and mutters, "If this sparks anything, it will be heartburn." You snort softly, hiding your laughter in the crowd. Not every romance ends sweetly. You stumble upon a courtroom scene where a man petitions for annulment, claiming his queen wife frightens him with her temper. The judge, unimpressed, rules, "Fear is not grounds for freedom. Try flowers instead." The hall roars with laughter, the man's ears turning crimson. Even in scandal, women hold the gavel, yet tenderness peeks through the cracks. You see a queen walk the garden at dawn, her hand entwined with that of a scholar poet. They pause by a fountain, whispering verses of love. No treaty, no ledger, just the fragile bloom of human connection. For a moment, the burdens of rule slip away, and you realize even queens crave warmth in a cold world. Still, danger lurks. A jealous noblewoman whispers accusations, claiming the queen favors foreigners. Pamphlets spread, hinting at treachery in silk sheets. One night, you hear shouting from a council chamber. Her heart endangers the realm. The torches flare, and you shiver at the knowledge that in any age, desire can unravel dynasties. By evening, the palace buzzes with intrigue. Courtiers slip through hidden doors, letters are smuggled under cloaks, and laughter masks daggers. You sit by the fire, sipping watered wine, while a bard sings of a queen who wed 3 husbands, burying 2 and exiling the 3rd. The refrain makes you smile despite yourself. Better a widow with land than a bride with chains. As you rise to leave, the ballroom quiets. The queen steps forward, her gaze sweeping the room. Every suitor straightens. Every courtier holds their breath. She smiles, not soft, not cruel, but enigmatic. And you realize love here is not tender submission, but calculated sovereignty. And you wonder, as you drift into the corridors where whispers curl like smoke, when queens rule hearts as well as crowns, does love become freedom, or just another form of power? The night's laughter and music fade into the sound of clashing iron. Pots thrown, boots stomping, voices raised. You step into a square where rebellion simmers. But it isn't. The familiar tale of peasants demanding bread or taxes lowered. Here, the world is inverted. Men rise in revolt, their shouts echoing through alleyways, their banners painted not with dragons or lions, but with crude pleas for rights restored. You move closer, weaving between angry clusters of men, there. Faces flushed, fists clenched around tools turned weapons. They call for inheritance reform, for seats at guild councils, for recognition that they, too, deserve a place in governance. Some demand to wed without dowries, others that they not be conscripted into kitchens. You suppress a grin. It sounds absurd to your ears, but the anger is real, heavy as the stones they clutch. Above them, a balcony creaks. A queen steps forward, robes flowing, voice calm but cutting. She raises her hand, and the mob hushes, as if charmed. You demand freedom, she says evenly, yet you already hold it. You demand honor, yet you mock it in your brawls. Tell me, what would you do with power if it were given back? The men murmur, shifting uneasily. The question pierces sharper than arrows. A mainstream fact reminds you. In Real Europe, the 1381 peasants' revolt erupted in England over oppressive taxes and serfdom. Here, imagine that same energy, but fueled by men pushed from inheritance lines, from councils, from guild halls. You picture whole towns rising in protest, not against lords and ladies, but against queens who claim to govern in their stead. Quirky tidbits surface too. One rebel brandishes a pig's bladder, inflated and painted with slogans, bouncing it like a drum. This, he shouts, is our banner. You snort as it bursts, spraying foul air. The crowd groans, then laughs nervously. Even uprisings stumble on slapstick. The rebellion is not only comedy. You walk through a village where men barricade streets with overturned carts, shouting chants that echo into night. They refuse to pay market tolls, demanding fair prices for their labor. Women officials march in, armored, carrying scrolls instead of swords. One unrolls a parchment and reads new decrees aloud. Tax cuts, reforms, promises of hearing grievances. The men quiet, suspicion hanging thick. You realize negotiation here is as much performance as violence. Historians still argue whether revolts ever truly changed feudal systems, or if they merely rattled chains without breaking them. In this Europe, the question remains. Queens may bend laws, offer token reforms, but the structure endures. The balance of gender, flipped though it is, still breeds unrest. You wander into a tavern where rebels meet in secret. The room reeks of ale and sweat, shadows flickering across worried faces. One man whispers about storming the guild hall. Another argues they should form a brotherhood, copying the clandestine nunneries that spread literacy. A third insists they demand nothing less than seats on councils. You sip from a mug, thin, watery stuff, and think, rebellion is always easier to plan with beer. In the streets, tension crackles. A cart tips, bread spills, and men scramble, their hunger louder than ideology. A guard intervenes, a scuffle breaks out, and suddenly torches flare. The queen's soldiers march in, shields raised. Voices clash with steel. For a moment, you fear massacre. But instead of slaughter, the commander orders a circle formed. The rebels are herded, lectured, then given loaves of bread and told to disperse. They leave grumbling, but alive. Mercy here is as calculated as cruelty. As dawn breaks, smoke lingers over villages, not from burning, but from cook fires rekindled. Men return to fields, muttering about lost causes. Some still whisper rebellion, others shrug and shoulder plows. Life resumes, rebellion folded back into routine. But the seed remains. You follow one weary rebel home. He sits at his table, children climbing onto his lap. His wife returns from market, sets down bread, and asks, "Did you make them listen?" He sighs, shaking his head. She pats his hand, whispering, "Maybe next year." The weight in her voice tells you everything. Rebellion is rarely one night, but generations. You step back into the road, the dust rising around your boots. This Europe, matriarchal though it is, cannot erase revolt. Power always breeds opposition. And as you walk on, you wonder, are revolutions ever about fairness, or are they simply the sound of those left out pounding on locked doors? You drift away from the smoke of rebellion into a quieter soundscape. Quills scratching on parchment, lutes strumming in courtyards, voices rising in debate under vaulted ceilings. This Europe is not only armies and uprisings, it is a hive of thought, song, and scholarship, all refracted through the lens of queens who hold the purse strings of patronage. You find yourself in a university hall in Bologna. The benches are filled not with rows of solemn young men, but with women in wool gowns, leaning over books chained to desks. Professors, both women and men, lecture on Aristotle, Galen, and Augustine, but the sharpest questions come from female students, their voices unafraid. One raises her hand to ask if the earth moves around the sun. The professor sputters, mutters something about heresy, and the class dissolves into laughter. You grin, knowing that historians still argue whether such ideas quietly circulated long before Copernicus. Here, they are whispered boldly, written in margins, and debated over cups of spiced wine that a mainstream fact ties you back. Real medieval universities, like Oxford and Paris, largely excluded women. A handful of noble women studied privately or in convent schools, but formal education remained male. In this alternate timeline, the opposite unfolds. Male students are the rarities, sometimes ridiculed as distractions, sometimes cherished for novelty. One boy nervously copies Latin, cheeks flushed as a classmate whispers that his handwriting looks like chicken scratches. He shrinks, and you hide your smile. Scholarship bleeds into art. You wander through a courtyard where troubadours perform. Songs not about knights rescuing damsels, but about queens rescuing cities or heroines winning hearts through clever riddles. A lute player strums verses of Queen Sibylla the Bold, who defended Jerusalem with wit sharper than swords. Children gather, clapping along, their eyes bright with tales where women are the heroes. Quirky tidbit. You overhear a scribe in a library, muttering about parchment made from donkey hides being superior to sheep. He insists it resists ink blots better. Another counters that only calfskin makes a codex worth keeping. The debate grows heated until an abbess intervenes, sighing, "If you men fought battles like you fight over parchment, perhaps you'd win more of them." Laughter ripples across the shelves. The libraries themselves are wonders. Candlelight flickers over endless shelves of scrolls and codices. Women catalog them with meticulous care, inventing systems that look suspiciously like early card catalogs. You trace a finger over the spine of a manuscript, a richly illuminated psalter showing Eve not as sinner, but as wise mother. You pause, struck by how subtly, yet profoundly, narratives shift when written by different hands. In Paris, salons buzz. Noble women host gatherings where poets recite verses, philosophers spar, and musicians fill the air with harmony. Men arrive, nervously, clutching sonnets they hope will impress. One young man reads his poem, blushing furiously, until the hostess pats his shoulder and says, "Charming, but try again when your metaphors make sense." The room erupts in chuckles. You sip imaginary wine, savoring the wit as much as the melody. Historians still argue whether medieval culture ever had room for genuine female voices, or if chroniclers erased them. Here, they are impossible to ignore. Chronicles are penned by abbesses, queens, and guild mistresses. Plays feature heroines delivering biting monologues. Even stained glass shifts, showing Deborah, Esther, and mythical queens alongside Peter and Paul. The balance of representation tilts, and you feel it in your bones. Not all is lofty, though. You stroll into a tavern where minstrels sing bawdy verses about men forced to scrub floors, their rhymes crude but catchy. The crowd roars with laughter, mugs sloshing ale. Humor, you realize, remains the equalizer. Whether sung in courts or taverns, it keeps everyone honest, and knowledge does not stay in halls. You stumble upon a peasant woman teaching letters to children on a church step, chalking letters into dirt. Her students giggle, tracing letters with sticks. Among them sits a boy, struggling, but smiling when she praises him. It is quiet, simple, yet as revolutionary as the grandest decrees. Night falls, and candles glow in scriptoriums and stages alike. The air hums with words, some whispered in study, some sung in song, some carved into stone. You pause, listening. This Europe of queens sings louder, writes deeper, and remembers differently. As you step away into the cool air, the melodies trail you. You wonder, is culture ever neutral, or does every poem, every law, every fresco always bear the fingerprints of whoever holds the pen? Asterisk the music of Europe fades, replaced by the sound of hoofbeats over endless plains. You are no longer in Parisian salons or candlelit libraries. You are riding with emissaries across borders, stepping into courts where Europe's queens face rulers who do not share their customs. This is where diplomacy glitters and cracks, where silk veils conceal daggers, and where the matriarchal order of Europe collides with other worlds. You arrive first in Cordoba, where the minarets glint gold in the sun. Inside a hall tiled with mosaics, an Andalusian emir greets a queen's delegation. The queen herself sits on cushions, her veil embroidered with sapphires, her voice steady as she negotiates safe passage for merchants. The emir strokes his beard, skeptical and used to women speaking with such authority. Yet when she slides across the table a map annotated with every port from Lisbon to Alexandria, he blinks, impressed. Trade trumps tradition. You watch as ink seals a pact, the calligraphy flowing like water. A mainstream fact roots itself here. In the real Middle Ages, queens like Blanche of Castile or Eleanor of Aquitaine negotiated treaties, though often through male proxies. Here, those proxies vanish. Queens write their own letters, send their own envoys, and occasionally, boldly, step into foreign courts themselves. The sight unsettles allies and enemies alike, and you see it in the way men glance nervously, whispering, "Is this the new order?" Further east, across windswept plains, you find yourself in a Mongol encampment. Tents of felt the horizon, smoke rising into blue skies. A queen rides in with her retinue, meeting not a Khan but a Khatan, one of the formidable women who historically influenced Mongol politics. The two leaders exchange gifts, bolts of silk, ivory figurines, even a falcon hooded in gold. They laugh, sipping fermented mare's milk, while their generals eye each other warily. You realize that in this encounter, neither woman blinks. Diplomacy here feels less like collision and more like recognition, a meeting of equals across steps. Quirky tidbit. A translator whispers that Mongol hosts sometimes offered fermented horseblood as a drink. You imagine a poor European envoy gagging politely, muttering. Historians will still argue whether this was hospitality or hazing. You suppress a laugh as you picture the grimace. South, into Africa, you stand in the court of Mali. Griot sing of gold rivers and vast caravans. A queen negotiator bows before Musa Musa himself, her voice steady as she requests safe trade for salt and ivory. Musa listens, his robes shimmering with golden dust, and replies, "Your queens command as our kings do. The world is wide, yet our hearts may meet in gold." The queen smiles, treaty sealed with wealth rather than conquest. In Constantinople, the Byzantine empress receives Europe's queens with wry amusement. Draped in silk, she remarks, "So, the West finally learns what the East has long known, that women may govern as well as men." You smirk at her tone, the sarcasm is sharp as a jeweled dagger. Candles flicker on mosaics depicting Christ and the Virgin, their faces serene as deals are hammered out below. Diplomacy, however, is never safe. You witness an envoy poisoned in Cairo, collapsing mid-supper. Whispers spiral through the court. Was it an accident, a rival queen's plot, or the Sultan's rejection? The truth remains murky, and you think. Historians will still argue whether diplomacy is ever more than polite warfare. Beyond the grand courts, you see quieter exchanges. A queen's emissary sits with a Bedouin matriarch under a desert tent, sharing stories over sweet tea. They trade not treaties but songs, discovering kinship in rhythm. Another queen scribe records African proverbs alongside Latin philosophy, blending wisdoms into manuscripts that will travel back to Europe. Culture drifts like pollen, impossible to contain, and not all encounters end smoothly. In one tense scene, a male chieftain in the Baltic refuses to bow to a queen's authority. He sneers, declaring that no woman may dictate his forests. Her envoy replies calmly, "Then perhaps your forests will burn." A pause, then uneasy laughter. Deals made under threat still count, though the ink dries shaky at dusk, You sit on a caravan's edge, watching torches flicker in foreign night. The queen's advisors murmur about tariffs, coin weights, and routes. Men and women alike shift under the enormity of what's unfolding. Europe's queens extend their reach not by swords alone, but by ink, gifts, and presents. You feel the hum of it all, the thrill, the tension, the subtle dance of power. And you wonder, when queens sit across from rulers of the world, do they reshape diplomacy, or does diplomacy reshape them? The caravan fires fade behind you, and soon you are back in the stone corridors of Europe, where whispers carry more weight than armies. Power, when stretched too thin, begins to crack. Queens may rule every throne, but thrones are never steady. Rivalries flicker like candle flames, betrayals linger like smoke, and the fragile crown of matriarchy begins to feel heavy. You walk into a council chamber in Paris, where two queens argue over borders. One slams her fist on the table, rings, clattering, declaring, "That valley is mine by right of my grandmother." The other smiles coolly, replying, "Then perhaps your grandmother should rise from her grave to defend it." Courtiers shift uncomfortably, scribes record every word, and you can almost hear the ink hiss with tension. In our real history, rivalries like that between Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth I nearly tore kingdoms apart. Here, multiply that by dozens. Every throne has a queen, every queen has ambitions, and every ambition breeds suspicion. Alliances shift like quicksand. A treaty signed at dawn may be torn by dusk. You wander deeper, finding secret chambers where letters are sealed, with wax and poison alike. A servant whispers of a duchess plotting against her cousin, bribing guards with bolts of cloth. In another hall, a queen conspires with her own daughter, whispering promises of shared rule if only the husband is quietly removed. Historians still argue whether medieval dynasties collapsed from war or from family feuds. In this world, the answer feels obvious. Both, tangled into one web. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some nobles once believed carrying a dried weasel's foot warded off betrayal. Here, courtiers clutch them like talismans, hidden in sleeves and pouches. You see one drop onto the floor during a banquet, and the room erupts in laughter. The poor man turns crimson, stammering, "Better safe than stabbed." You smirk, knowing. Superstition thrives where daggers hide. Castles you once admired now feel different. Their stone walls echo with suspicion. Guards eye one another warily. In one great hall, a queen greets her guests with wine, only for a taster to collapse moments later. Poison? Accident? No one knows, but every goblet is left untouched. The banquet dissolves into whispers and glares. You realize queens can be just as ruthless as kings. Power doesn't soften simply because it wears a veil. In the countryside, rumors spread. Some peasants whisper that the queens are cursed, their rivalries bringing famine and plague. Others claim the matriarchy has angered heaven, pointing to storms and failed harvests as proof. A preacher shouts in the marketplace, demanding repentance. The crowd listens, uneasy, glancing at the castle walls. You catch the note of fear, the kind that gnaws slowly, eroding trust. You step into a convent where even nuns debate loyalties. Some support their ruling queens wholeheartedly. Others mutter that too much ambition stains the soul. A novice nervously asks, "If all queens are holy, why do they fight?" Silence follows, heavy as stone. Faith, too, trembles under rivalry. Historians still argue whether stability in Europe ever truly existed or if it was only the illusion of strong monarchs. In this alternate world, you feel the cracks spreading. Letters intercepted, alliances betrayed, husbands caught in webs of deceit, daughters set against mothers. The matriarchy is mighty, yes, but it is not immune to the oldest poison of all, ambition. At dusk, you walk through a castle garden, once blooming, now trampled by spies. You overhear a whisper between two ladies in waiting. "If our queen falls, her sister will rise." The other replies, "And if her sister falls, her niece waits already." You feel the chill in your bones. Succession never sleeps. And yet, amid the chaos, the queens endure. Their crowns tilt, their alliances falter, but still they rise each morning to command armies, courts, and prayers. Their resilience astonishes you. But resilience is not invincibility. You wonder as you walk into the deepening night, is matriarchy the future's foundation, or is it just another crown waiting to crack under its own weight? Asterisk the night of rivalry drifts into dawn, and with it, the centuries begin to blur. You keep walking, your boots striking cobblestones that shift beneath you, from medieval stone to Renaissance marble to modern pavement. History stretches like a long corridor, and you trace the echoes of what queens ruling Europe might have left behind. You pass a printing press in the 15th century, its wheels clattering. Instead of monks controlling every word, women printers churn out books on law, medicine, and philosophy, their ink-stained hands brisk, efficient. Pamphlets circulate not of kings' decrees, but queens' visions. And when revolutions stir centuries later, women already hold the pens that draft constitutions. A mainstream fact grounds you. The printing revolution did change Europe forever, breaking the monopoly of the church over knowledge. Here, with queens directing presses, imagine literacy spreading even faster among women, education treated as a necessity rather than privilege. Universities no longer argue whether women may attend. They argue whether men can keep up. The world keeps spinning. You find yourself in the age of exploration. Ships creak in harbors, but this time, queens commission voyages directly. A woman. Navigator charts stars by candlelight, her maps guiding fleets to the Americas and beyond. You overhear a sailor muttering that his captain insists on naming new lands after daughters rather than kings. Historians still argue whether colonization was inevitable or shaped by personalities. Here, it is shaped by the persistence of women signing the orders. Quirky tidbit. One explorer queen insists on bringing barrels of rosewater to mask the stench of long voyages. Sailors complain their rations taste of perfume, but the captains shrug. Better roses than rot. You chuckle, imagining entire fleets smelling faintly floral as they storm foreign coasts. Centuries slide further. In the Enlightenment, salons are no longer subversive corners. They are the engine of philosophy itself. Queens and their descendants debate Locke, Rousseau, and Voltaire. Except here, it isn't Voltaire who dominates, but voices like Voltairine, a philosopher queen who insists reason must include both hearth and throne. The age of ideas tilts toward inclusivity long before our own world dared. You wander into the Industrial Revolution. Smokestacks loom, machines rumble, and women in crisp uniforms manage factories, their ledgers precise. Men labor in workshops, some proud, some bitter. Strikes flare, but they are men's strikes, demanding shorter hours, better pay, dignity. Their banners read, "We are not just hands, we are voices." The echoes remind you of Section 9, where men marched for rights. Under queens, the wheel of history repeats, only tilted on a different axis. Now, in the modern age, you walk city streets where statues rise not of armored kings, but of queens, queens everywhere, on coins, on flags, in stories. Some are noble, some ruthless, some forgotten. You see Eleanor, Isabel, Marguerite, Sibylla carved into marble, their eyes cold and watchful. Buskers play songs about their victories, and schoolchildren recite their speeches as easily as multiplication tables. But cracks remain. Even in this matriarchal modernity, voices question whether rule by women solved anything, or simply flipped the script. Wars still scar Europe. Famine, plague, greed. They came no matter who wore the crown. A historian on a street corner mutters. Historians will still argue whether it was better, worse, or simply different. His students nod, scribbling notes. You nod too. As evening falls, you step into a museum. Glass cases gleam with relics, crowns encrusted with pearls, law books signed by queens, love letters preserved on yellow parchment. One display shows a dried weasel's foot, once clutched by nervous courtiers. You grin, remembering the superstition, then sigh, realizing even talismans tell stories that last. You wander out into a park. The sky above is violet, stars blinking awake. You sit on a bench, and the centuries settle like dust. You have walked through an alternate Europe, one where women ruled from start to finish. You have seen courts and kitchens, battles and books, scandals and rebellions. And now you are left with one lingering question. If women had ruled always, Would our world be gentler, sharper, stranger, or simply human, as it ever was? The night deepens, and your voice softens, words stretching like lullabies. Asterisk the pace. Slows. The stones of castles fade into soft grass beneath your feet. The noise of rebellion and the roar of battle dissolve into the hum of wind through trees. You walk gently now, no longer in torchlight, but under moonlight. The world quiets. Every crown, every rivalry, every laughter-filled hall recedes into memory. What remains is calm, the steady rhythm of history as it sighs into night. You picture yourself in a cloister garden, herbs fragrant in the cool air. Candles flicker in distant windows, but here there is only peace. The queens, the scribes, the rebels, all drift into silence. You breathe slowly, the air soft, the earth steady beneath you. The story lingers like a dream. You have wandered centuries, but now it is time to rest. Time to let go of questions, to release curiosity, to close your eyes and trust the dark. Every sound fades, the bells, the songs, the whispers of scandal, until all that remains is quiet. And in that quiet, you find rest. Let the weight of crowns lift from your shoulders. Let the world soften around you. Drift, slowly, gently, into sleep.